I've just taken delivery of my very first wide-angle Cine lens, the 7Artisans 14mm T2.9 Spectrum. And I wanted to make a quick video to talk about my first impressions, and to show you some real-world examples of footage that I took today. So let's get right into some footage and then I'll talk about my initial thoughts. So how does this lens look and feel? I think that anybody looking to purchase their first Cine lens, whether they admit it or not, does care about how the lens looks. And this one looks wonderful. It's packaged nicely, the design is sleek, and its metal components give it a good weight without it being too heavy. Both the aperture and the focus rings feel quite stiff, but this feels nice and it should be quite easy to get used to. Once it's on the camera, it looks the part, even on my beat up old A73. Once it's attached, the lens sits very close to the camera, which can make it a little bit tricky to take off again, but that's such a minor issue. So let's move on to the framing and the focusing. If you aren't used to shooting anything super wide, let's say more than about 24mm, then 14mm really is a shock to the system. I mean, jokes aside, it's just so wide, and honestly perhaps too wide for some. But I bought this lens because I wanted to try and replicate those shots in films that I love that are full of character and life, and for that 14mm is awesome. Framing really does take some getting used to, but when it's done right, the results are worth it. Now for the biggest issue that I've faced so far, and that's focusing. As with the framing, if you're not used to manually focusing wide-angle lenses, then there's going to be a bit of a learning curve here. I shoot manual almost 100% of the time when I'm using my other lenses, and I've gotten very good at it. But those are all at least 50mm and above, and this is much more difficult. The issue is that at 14mm, everything looks in focus all of the time when you're shooting. So if you're like me and you like to punch right in for precise focusing at wide apertures, you're gonna struggle here because you just can't do it the same way. When I was out shooting, I was convinced that I was never gonna get a handle on the focusing. Everything was going to be out of focus and I'd hate the footage. I'd already started returning the lens in my head because I just thought this is beyond me. But here's the thing, when I got back and I checked the footage, it looked great. And it turns out that everything looks like it's always in focus because it basically is. It's only when you're shooting close subjects that more skill and attention is required. But for those shots, it's easier to notice when you're in and out of focus anyway. So for establishing shots and big wide scenes, I left it in f4 or 5.6 and it caught everything I needed. If you struggle to manually focus this lens or any other new lens, then just remember that this takes time and it will be worth the results if you keep practicing. Nobody is good at this from the start automatically. Okay, moving on to the footage itself. So am I happy with the footage? Yeah, I'd say that I am. Now I have to give a bit of a disclaimer here in favor of the lens. First of all, I went out and shot this footage on a very wet, grey, miserable day. I'm also shooting it on an old Sony A73 with completely standard colour and profile settings. This isn't cine or log footage, it's straight out of the camera 4K 25p footage. And I edited it really quickly in a coffee shop using some of the built-in LUTs inside Premiere Pro. So if you were attaching this lens to a camera that's better suited for shooting video, you had some more interesting and colourful scenery to shoot, and the footage was properly graded, I think it could look really great. But also, without all that, I think it looks great anyway. And I'm really excited to see what I can do with this lens at one of my upcoming events. I shoot a lot of weddings and I use my Samyang 85 T1.5 for probably 95% of the footage that I shoot. But when I need something wider, I have to use one of my AF photo lenses, like this 25mm Batis f2, and they do the job just fine. But I want something a bit more real and made for video to match up with my 85mm footage. And that's why I've bought the 14mm 7Artisans. I've also ordered the 25mm T1.05, which is a crop sensor lens, so it will be closer to about 35, to see if that will suit my wide angle needs better. So I'll make a video on that one when it arrives and compare the two to let you know which one I'm going to keep. Links to the 7Artisans 14mm and the VD filter that I was using with it are down in the description, as well as all of my other gear. If you enjoyed this video and you'd like to see a more in-depth review of this lens further down the line, then please let me know in the comments, and please leave a like to support the channel. Cheers.